What's up, everybody? We're back once again. Corey Hughes, Bloody History, in the fucking house. Hope you're ready. Because today we're continuing Part 5, Weisberg's Kerry Thornley archive. We are on the 34th PDF out of about, I don't know how many fucking things we got here. We got 84. I thought there was more than that. 84 files. We're on number 34. We'll be here for another couple days, maybe a week. But, we'll take as much time as it requires because there's no other show in the goddamn world that goes into this much micro detail on the assassination. So, today's going to be no different. Today's going to be even fucking better. And why is it going to be better? Are we going to have any more answers today than we had yesterday? No. Are we going to have any more exciting fucking cloak and dagger shit than we had yesterday? No. What are we going to have more of today that we didn't have yesterday? We're going to have more names. More names. Names that I am vocalizing to the universe. I'm throwing out into the ether. Of course, this is all stuff that I should probably do in the body of my research coming up. But I'm throwing these names out there, so hopefully that somebody listening will be inspired and perhaps do some research on these fucking people who have never been named in the history of the Kennedy assassination before. Let me see if there's anything else. If you haven't bought the fucking book, please go to Amazon.com, buy my book. It's called A Warning from History. It is the definitive book on the assassination, if there is such a thing, which honestly, there is really no such a thing. Like, when I get done with my series of books, that will be the definitive telling of the assassination. But it's impossible to put the assassination telling into one book, obviously. But I guarantee there is no other Kennedy book out there that has more information jam-packed with fucking resources to back it up than my book. So please go get it. Plus, I need the money. I also have these really fucking awesome posters. I've got the cover of the book in a limited edition of 100 fine art poster print. Damn thing's almost like photograph quality. But those are $50 shipped. You can get that from buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook. And also, if you're interested in my work, you can purchase my notes. It comes with a copy of the ebook and access to my private chat room. So the private chat room's blowing up. We got some good researchers in there lately, and they're throwing all kinds of good information out there. And so, but that's that. That's housekeeping shit. And I hate the housekeeping shit. I hate the marketing shit. I hate having to sell a fucking book. I mean, honestly, I despise all this shit. All the superfluous stuff that goes along with broadcasting and because honestly, I just want to research. That's me. I'm a fucking researcher. I want answers. That's all I give a fuck about. But I'm forced to do all this other shit surrounding the research in order to pay the bills, in order to keep the lights on. You know what I mean? So I find it very frustrating because if it was up to me, I'd just be sitting in a fucking room for 12 to 14 hours a day with some fucking, with some weed and my glasses, and that's about it. So, but here we are. We're moving forward into part 5 of Harold Weisberg's Kerry Thornley archive. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to go over a bunch of correspondence from Harold Weisberg to Jim Garrison. I want you to kind of get a peek into the mind of Weisberg, which is something we all desperately need, all of us. And we all desperately need a peek into the mind of Jim Garrison, because I am convinced beyond all shadow of any doubts that Jim Garrison knew way more about who actually pulled triggers and who was in Dealey Plaza and all that stuff than he ever said publicly, that he ever wrote down publicly, that he ever even implied publicly. And the reason I say this is because of the manner in which he organized his files. He organized his files by his suspicion of people's activities, largely, like I've given the example of Sergei Arcacha and the Winterland, right? When you study the Sergei Arcacha file within the Jim Garrison papers, it's all about the Winterland, right? So what does that tell you? What does that tell you? But it never mentions Arcacha in Arcacha's file. Huh? Kind of funny, huh? What does it tell you? It tells you that fucking Garrison knew that Arcacha went to the Winterland and not David Ferry. That's why all the Winterland shit was in Sergei Arcacha's file, because he knew it. Why do you think that Kerry Thornley's file opens with a memo about J.D. Tippit, followed by a FBI report about Douglas Jones? Why? Because fucking Garrison knew that Kerry Thornley was the Oswald lookalike who shot J.D. Tippit, and he also knew that he was the man who picked up the flyers from Douglas Jones at Jones Printing, and that Oswald had nothing to do with it. So Harold Weisberg. When I look over these documents and I look at the correspondence and all the stuff that Weisberg put together, which his files are way more extensive than Garrison's, but I'm convinced that Garrison's files are mostly destroyed. I'm convinced we have like less than 10% of Garrison's files. Less than 10%. And why do I say this? I was a cop for a long fucking time. I could go out to a barking dog call and that report will be 12 to 15 pages long. Okay? 2 to 3 pages of fucking suspect and subject information, a page about summary information. I mean, you got like administrative pages. You've got all kinds of shit, right? There's none of that in the goddamn Garrison files, period. Okay, none of it. I understand exactly how much fucking paperwork an investigative agency at a district attorney's office would compile over fucking 10 years, right? Over the 10 years that he studied this shit from like 67 or 66 all the way to like 70s, the late 70s, right? So, like, there should be a fucking million pages just in Garrison's documents. A million. At least. Okay? It should include bullshit like fucking supply requests. Like, I need more pens. Like, there should be a slip in there for that. And none of that exists. None of it. Okay? That's all relevant shit. Okay? It might not sound like it, but it is. Every single administrative document's relevant. And none of that shit is there. None of it. Okay? And there's no files on Lawrence Howard, William Seymour, Lauren Hall. None of the goddamn guys who pulled the triggers. Except for Arcacha, David Ferry, and who else? That's it. Arcacha and David Ferry. The only 2 shooters he had files on. Right? Because they were too obvious. They were too much of a face in the mix of things down in New Orleans. So, for those of you who are new to the show, or if you haven't been following my work for years, which is most people who I'm finding are listening to this show are people who just discovered my work recently. And so I forget that I have to reiterate a lot of the stuff that, to me, I take for granted. But the large-scale structure of the assassination left most of the responsibility to New Orleans. Like, I didn't believe this for a very long time. I'm like, if fucking Oliver Stone made a movie about these guys and focused on New Orleans, there's no way that it's correct. But it mostly is correct. Like, the vast majority of the activity surrounding the assassination, that number one, you'll find on paper. And number 2 has really any relevance at all, because the mob shooters they brought in kind of sucked, right? They didn't do shit, right? Dave Yaris missed. Right? There's no need to bring in fucking Danny Green and the Tramps. They didn't need to send anybody from Cleveland. Robert Bernard Baker could have stayed to fucking New Jersey. They didn't have to send anybody except for New Orleans and Jack Valenti. That's it, because those other mob guys didn't really do fucking squat. Didn't amount to a hill of beans at the end of the fucking day. So yes, the focus should be on New Orleans. The focus should definitely be on New Orleans. Clay Shaw, David Ferry, Kerry Thornley. On a lesser extent, Gordon Novell. Lesser extent, Beckham, right? Who went by Mark Evans, the fucking one-man traveling, singing preacher fucking joke. All those guys are secondary, right? But the focus should be on the main characters, the top of the pyramid in New Orleans really was Clay Shaw, and underneath him, David Ferry and Kerry Thornley. Guy Bannister, I kind of put parallel, right? He's parallel to this. He's adjacent. He's a conspirator adjacent. There will always be guys who are in the know who aren't in the mix, right? That's always the case. Like Fred Lee Chrisman, right? In the know, probably not in the mix. The CIA did a good job of maintaining their plausible deniability by leaving the bulk of this stuff to guys who were utterly disposable. David Ferry, and they're all disposable except for who? The shooter on the knoll, right? And he had to be there. Why he had to be there, I don't know, but that whole story is about Jack Valenti, right? The whole assassination story begins and ends with him. He's the alpha and he is the omega. He sent the letter inviting Kennedy to Texas, and he pulled the trigger that killed Kennedy. Unquestionably the alpha and the omega. Right? The beginning and the end was all Jack Valenti. The whole story revolved around Jack Valenti. Jack Valenti sat on the board of the Dallas Citizens Council. He organized parts of the motorcade. He organized. He had some say in where Kennedy spoke. He handled all of the arrangements and the accommodations surrounding Kennedy's speaking. But we're getting off topic here. Within that larger paradigm of the Jack Valenti show, you have the operators in New Orleans. Clay Shaw being, I don't want to say a handler because he was in the mix. He was in the mix for sure. He was at the party where they ran their mouth in front of Perry Russo. Right? So the idea that, getting back to Harold Weisberg, the idea that Weisberg and fucking Jim Garrison couldn't put two and two together on this is ridiculous. Like, bullshit. It's ridiculous. They knew a lot. They knew a lot more than they ever said publicly. And why? I don't know. Maybe they didn't want to get sued. Who gives a fuck? But yeah, Weisberg and these letters to Jim Garrison, I think, are important because they basically give us an insight into what Weisberg thought was important. Some insight into his mind, right? Some character development of Harold Weisberg. So to Jim Garrison from Harold Weisberg, 4768. And these series of letters is in date order, chronological order, as per this collection in the archive. Reference Kerry Thornley. Barbara Reed says that Al Thompson, Bruce Owens, Paul Owens came here together from the operation of Washington Coffee Shop. Of a Washington coffee shop. Sorry, there was a rather controversial Washington coffee shop that I do recall. It was in constant official difficulty. All right, so let me just take a second to just analyze what we're saying here. Barbara Reed, who's an associate of Kerry Thornley, who spills the beans on Kerry Thornley and tells Garrison that he knew Oswald in New Orleans. She says Al Thompson, Bruce Owens, Paul Owens came here together from the operation of a Washington coffee shop. So this is obviously connected to intelligence, or else we wouldn't even be having this conversation at all, would we? So this Washington coffee shop, and then you have like the Riley coffee shop, and then you have the, what's the other one in New Orleans? There's Riley, and then there's, God damn it, it's on the tip of my tongue. It'll come to me. But there's the other coffee shop that Kerry Thornley was often seen at. The Ryder Coffee Shop. Okay. The Ryder Coffee Shop. So you have all these coffee shops going on, and you have people who are obviously connected with intelligence behind these coffee shops. I don't know. Why is that? These are CIA fronts, obviously, because they were cutting paychecks to Oswald and Thornley and a bunch of other people, I'm sure, and Dante Marancino and all these other guys who allegedly, apparently, worked for them before going off to work in aerospace, right? So there's an intelligence connection to these fucking coffee shops. Let's keep that in mind. With them were Daniel Carter Pickles. Well, hopefully they'll clarify that moving forward. Whose brother was religious editor of the Houston Chronicle, and Judith Allen. Barbara incidentally gave Judith her maternity clothes. This conforms to the other Barbara on the pregnancy. Okay, stop the presses. Stop the presses. Why are we stopping the presses? Anybody who's familiar with my work, actually you'd have to be intimately familiar with my work to know why we're stopping the presses. But we're stopping the presses because I have been on the hunt for what? For a third pregnant woman, right? So who are the pregnant women that we've had so far? We have had Marina Oswald, right? Pregnant woman number 1. Okay. Pregnant woman number 2 is going to be, oh fuck, I can't believe I'm holding on this. Sandra Moffat, who's kind of a hang around of David Ferry's crew, a hang around of Perry Russo. I think she's the link between Perry Russo and David Ferry's crew. Initially introduced them. Sandra Moffat was pregnant for a while, but she had given birth in August. Because I'm looking for a third pregnant woman who met Oswald in the theater, right? Third pregnant woman who met Oswald in the theater. So, Let me reread this because this might hold some extreme significance because this might be the third pregnant woman that I've been looking for. Barbara Reed says Al Thompson, Bruce Owens, Paul Owens came here together from the operation of a Washington coffee shop. Okay, so we've already established there's a connection between intelligence and coffee shops. There was a rather controversial Washington coffee shop that I do recall. I was in constant official difficulty. With them were Daniel Carter Pickles, whose brother was a religious editor of the Houston Chronicle, and Judith Allen. Barbara, incidentally, gave Judith her maternity clothes. This conforms the other Barbara on the pregnancy, or confirms. There's a typo here somewhere. Barbara thinks she first met Thornley at Pickles' apartment, 506 Governor Nichols. That's a street. Okay, so, God damn it. This is important, and we're probably never going to get through all the shit that I plan on doing today because I just realized the significance of this. So, what do we have here? We have a woman named Judith Allen, who was obviously pregnant at some time. She's associated with Barbara Reed, Al Thompson, Bruce Owens, Paul Owens, who are intelligence and associated with a coffee shop. So, do you see why I'm thinking we might have just found our pregnant intelligence woman, right? Barbara R. thinks, that's Barbara Reed, thinks she first met Thornley at Pickles' apartment. Okay, so what else are we doing here? We're constructing a timeline of Thornley's life in New Orleans and when he met Barbara Reed. So, there's a possibility that might also be a coincidence that Thompson moved into what had been Mike Slatter's apartment in the 200 block of Royal Street on the third floor. Vic Latham was close to Bruce Owens. You see? Okay, so with all this Thornley stuff we've been going over for the past couple days, and fortunately it's all locked up in 3 or 4 specific documents, but this is where like one of those maps would come in super handy. You know, like Ryan Dawson's famous fucking Epstein and 9/11 maps and all that stuff, right? Like a map just surrounding Kerry Thornley. So there's a couple things when you do like real professional level research that you find become like essential tools in the toolbox. And one is chronologies, right? Like laying out dates specifically and putting it somewhere so you can actually visualize it and look at it. Things fall into place and become much more obvious when you understand the true chronology. And also these people maps, right? So the people map with Kerry Thornley in the center. Actually, I wouldn't even put him in the center. You'd put people like who? Who would you put in the center of a Kerry Thornley map? His handlers, right? And who are his handlers here? Well, obviously, we've got Martin McAuliffe. We've got Clint Bolton. We've got Bud Simcoe. We've got Lieutenant Ballantyne. Who else? You would definitely then have Kerry Thornley, and then you would have Philip Boatwright. And we'll get to Philip Boatwright in depth at some point. All right, I'm going to continue because I'm losing track of myself here. So Vic Latham was close to Bruce Owens. The name of the man interested in theatrical productions mentioned by the other Barbara. So we have 2 Barbaras at play here, right? We have Barbara Reed, and then we have another Barbara. Is Bill Delys, real name Schmidt. So Bill Schmidt is Bill Delys, D-E-L-Y-S. He had done such things as 3 Penny Opera. Okay, here's another thing. Anybody got a fucking alias works for the CIA. Okay, normal people don't do this shit, right? My name isn't Corey Hughes, but people sometimes call me Joe. No, okay? When you got a fucking alias, you're fucking working with intelligence. Or you're a wannabe hang-around. Either way, you're connected one way or another. So the name of the man interested in theatrical productions mentioned by the other Barbara is Bill Delys, real name Schmidt. He had done such things as 3 Penny Opera. Among those he took was Barbara for several $1,000s. Here again is confirmation of the other B, B meaning Barbara. In connection with Thompson, she also mentioned the names of Joe Sage. That name's ringing a bell for some reason. And Bobby Quinto. I do not recall in what connection Schmidt and McAuliffe both lived at Napoleon House. It's Martin McAuliffe. McAuliffe knew Lila Hay. At this same 506 Governor Nichols' address were Betty Helton, who lived with Dan Hovde, H-O-V-D-E. It's got to be wrong or a misspelling. If I can read part of my note on this correctly, she was murdered or died. If my recollection is correct, there was some hip bruising on her body, and he explained it away. There is a 531.63 state item story on some kind of weapons, and my note includes, quote, say of disaster, or day of disaster, quote, end quote. Tony Chaudron, S-H-A-U-D-R-O-N, S&M, this is S-M, close friend of Shaw. Illegible note then says, in this apartment, but left before question of death. Tony, very handsome. Then there is another illegible note about a French opera stripper and someone who also worked there. Bill Boone, wealthy, once owned yacht, New Owens Group, close to Shaw. So goddamn. This might not seem it, but this is extremely significant. Not really in as far as direct connections to the assassination, but what are we doing? We're not only engaging in Thornley character development by looking who he surrounded himself with, we are trying to pick this single thread out of a tangled scheme that will lead us to other conspirators, right? So we are literally picking a needle out of a haystack. We're going through every single piece of hay. And at some point, a pattern will emerge. And from that pattern, we will be able to definitively make statements on relationships. And remember, the relationships are everything. And once you can lock in a relationship, God, everything else will fall into place around it. And quickly, too. So, all right. I don't even know what the fuck I'm talking about. So we're just going to move on. The next page, I believe, is not a continuation. I think it's just a duplication. Yeah. So we'll move to this one. What is this? All right. I already filtered these, and I dumped a whole bunch of ones that I thought were just a waste of time. But, all right. So, to Jim Garrison from Harold Weisberg, 4/12/68, on Kerry Thornley. From several who knew him, I learned that Thornley had an interest in an attractive Latin waitress who worked at Carlos Castillo's. She now seems to be working at the Alpine. Thornley being what he is, there is a chance that given the recollection, she might have interesting things to say. I do not expect to be able to get to see her this trip. I've started another memo, including conversation taped with Jack Burnside about... Oh, why the fuck do they do this? They just type over shit. Fings, fangs, fongs, who the fuck knows? About something. F something NGS. He now says that he was there at the time in question in 1963 because red beans and rice were 50 cents. And though someone who pointed Oswald out was not Kerry Thornley, he was vague about the time until we pushed him when he placed it at about September 1st. He says he spent a couple hours with Kerry and his lawyer, as Barbara understood it, but he recalls nothing of significance either said a rather long time for nothing. Again, he dropped in at Barbara's last night. I had taken Dion there to question her because Barbara would be there and because Jack working would undoubtedly drop in. He did. George Higginbotham was there when we arrived, without having announced my intention earlier. We stayed in the house for a while. Then I took her to the Seven Seas for a drink and saw a short, strange-looking, heavily haired, and bearded young man she described as Junior, the man she did not want identified in the car as he was leaving. On our return, George was still there. When there was a knock at the door, it was Burnside. I kept him outside, explaining why, and talking to him until George left. At this time, Burnside said that when working good, he can make more than $30 a day. That's over $200 a week is not unusual, but that the work is seasonal and often his income is considerably less. Barbara says he will do anything for money and that right now he seems to need it, not confirmed by his volunteered comment on his day's earnings. There was a brief conversation with Higginbotham during which he and Burnside referred to Johnstone Coulter in a manner that meant nothing to me. Barbara had earlier told me Coulter is a friend of Higginbotham, lives at 1425 Leontine, 8950924, that she has been talking now with some success with Higginbotham, reference Novell, and that Al Thompson is shipping out of San Francisco. I also had a few words with Higginbotham earlier in the house and attempted to plant a few ideas about scapegoats. Interesting. Right? Interesting. The plot is thickening. What the plot is at this point, we don't know. But remember, we're just establishing a backdrop. And when the backdrop, the social backdrop of Kerry Thornley is complete, I believe that we will see those patterns that I referred to earlier. And then from that, we will be able to derive certain things from this pattern, right? Like importance and significance of certain relationships, right? Where to put weight on them. Why is putting weight in some relationships important and not others? Why is it important? How could that possibly apply to trying to determine a chain of command in an assassination plot, right? This is what we're doing. We're looking for gravity, so to speak, between players. Because the heavier the gravity, the more significant the relationship. All right, let's move on. This one's kind of short. To Lewis from Harold Weisberg, reference Kerry Thornley, April 16th, 68. My earlier memos indicate Thornley had a thing on a small, pretty, intelligent Latin waitress at Carlos Castillo's. My recent checking in New Orleans indicates she was most recently at the Alpine, the address of which I am told is 3500 Toulouse. I am also told she didn't like Carlos. I cannot imagine any enduring affection for Thornley, if one ever existed. Had I had time, I intended to interview her. I couldn't. So that's all this one says. The significance here is that Harold Weisberg wrote multiple letters in which he mentioned this waitress who worked for Carlos Castillo and then went on to work at the Alpine at 3500 Toulouse. But he never got around to talking to her. But he felt there might be significance there. But the fact that he thought that she didn't have much love for the owner, Carlos Castillo, who's probably intelligence, then she probably didn't have much love for Kerry Thornley either, right? So that's kind of the assumption that he's making here. All right. So, this one's lengthy. This one's going to have some good stuff in it. All right. So, this one marked confidential to Jim Garrison from Harold Weisberg, 4/18/68, reference Kerry Thornley. Because your Thornley file seemed to be incomplete after my return last month, I began an independent search of the federal information, together with what I recall, the accuracy of which I can guarantee it is interesting. Also interesting is what is not in the files. Thornley seems to prefer to claim that someone fingered him. Now Barbara Reed, then Tony Shembrowski. Sick. Neither is true. Let me back that up a bit. Okay. He seems to prefer a later date than the first federal interview with him. The private information I got in New Orleans is correct. He was interviewed by the Secret Service 2 days before the FBI sought him out. Shembrowski did not contact the FBI until 11 days after the assassination, 10 after the first federal interview. Okay, so If you'll recall, a couple days ago, we were discussing Kerry Thornley and the first time he was contacted by the Secret Service. In the first set of documents, he said it was Saturday, the next day after the assassination. Then he indicated that it was Saturday, but it was after midnight, right? Which still would have given him plenty of time to make it back from Dallas to New Orleans. Okay. Tony Shimbrowski. If I'm not mistaken, Tony Shimbrowski might have been the guy who was initially contacted by Secret Service because he was the boss of Kerry Thornley at the time, right? So here we have some clarification surrounding when the Secret Service and the FBI got a hold of Tony Shimbrowski and Kerry Thornley once Kerry Thornley made it back to New Orleans from Dallas. Okay? If one is to take the commission's letters at face value, it did not know where Thornley was on April 28, 1964, but did know that he was no longer at 1824 Dauphine. Under date of May 8th, Hoover told the commission his address. I have copies of the reports and memoranda, and will give them to you when I see you. The manuscript of The Idle Warrior should be available. It's 250 pages long, and it is allegedly complete. There is also a short novella, 37 pages. Xeroxing the first will cost $50. Damn, that's a lot of money in 1968. Someone in Dallas knew where Thornley lived, for that Secret Service office phoned the one in New Orleans at 7:30 p.m. on November 23rd, 63, asking that he be interviewed because, quote, Thornley had served in the Marine Corps with Oswald at El Toro, California, and that he had been in Mexico recently. Aha! So this is what Weisberg derived about Kerry Thornley and the Secret Service. So it says someone in Dallas knew where Thornley lived, for that Secret Service office phoned the one in New Orleans at 7:30 p.m. on November 23rd, 63, asking that he be interviewed because, quote, Thornley had served in the Marine Corps with Oswald at El Toro, California, and that he'd been in Mexico recently. Priceless. Let me screenshot this bitch. This is priceless. What does this tell us? This tells us that we can now say, based on the research of Harold Weisberg, that the Secret Service office in Dallas contacted the Secret Service office in New Orleans at 7:30 p.m. the day after the assassination, right? So it wasn't even that Saturday at midnight. It was the following midnight. Aha! There we go. Thornley was not contacted by the Secret Service until sometime between 7:30 and midnight on November the 23rd. Boom. Super important. I hope everybody can see the significance of that. Okay? Thornley had all the fucking time in the world. Hell, this is even after the goddamn phone calls to WSHO and fucking WDSU in New Orleans from the Alamo Motel by Sergio Arcacha, checking to make sure that motherfucking Kerry Thornley got back to New Orleans by calling his CIA contacts at those radio stations. See, and we would never know about Thornley's contacts at those radio stations if he didn't tell us about them. Right? If he didn't tell us about them, we would never know about his CIA contacts at those radio stations. You know? So, but he did. All right, so we are continuing on. I recall no reference to the Secret Service report in this deposition. Inquiry that night disclosed Thornley had been at that address about 2 weeks. Quote, during the late evening, he was interviewed by Arnautis by SAS Garretts and Rice. I understand this was about 11 p.m. So he's interviewed Saturday, the 23rd, 11 p.m. There we go. Thornley, quote, understood that Oswald had learned Russian while stationed in Japan, felt that at the time Oswald was not a communist, that he liked Orwell. He had written the novel and had considered looking up Oswald in order to obtain information concerning his experience in Russia for the final chapter, but that he had not done so. Thus, we have indication of the content of that final chapter. Of his trip to Mexico, Thornley said he left New Orleans in May of 1963, going to Whittier. where he worked for a while and returned to New Orleans by bus via Mexico, that he was in Mexico for approximately 6 days, 3 days in Mexico City, knew nothing about Oswald having been in Mexico. But remember, that's false. Remember, in his confession, he says to Jim Garrison he was there in September of 63. Right? This language is as indirect as the, quote, return, unnecessarily so, as the FBI reports show. Whether the evasion has significance, I do not know. In their second report, the one written after Thornley went to them, Regis Kennedy and Claude Schleger, 11/27/63, quote him as saying that, quote, on May 1st, 1963, he took a 6-day trip to California, and approximately July 25th, 1963, he took a 6-day trip into Mexico, returned to New Orleans about August 1st, 1963. According to their report typed 11/25/63, FBI agents Alderson and Farrell interviewed Thornley that date, also at Arnaud's. Oh, I guess Arnaud's is like a bar or something, possibly his employer. They do not give the time because the report was typed the same date as the interview. And because I understand Thornley worked nights, I suggest that this late night typing might be indicative of greater than average interest in Thornley. This report quotes him thus, quote, he was of the opinion that Oswald took Russian lessons in Japan during the time he was stationed with the Marine Corps. There is an ambiguity in this paragraph. One possible interpretation is that Thornley was saying he was the communist. Quote, Thornley stated that his association with Oswald was suddenly terminated at the Marine base when one day he told Oswald that he was a communist and that things would be different when the revolution came. He stated that Oswald made the statement, not you too, and turned and left. Oswald never associated with him or talked to him after this incident. This leaves no question about Oswald's reaction to being called a communist. This is a somewhat different version of the et tu incident than in the deposition on several counts. I do not believe that anywhere else Thornley said this was the end of their relations. In this report, Thornley is quoted as giving the same beginning and end and ending dates for his trip, but not giving any for the Mexican part. It says he entered Mexico via Tijuana and left through Matamoros. The next afternoon, 11/26/63, at 12:30 p.m., Thornley appeared at the FBI office to offer his services in any way to determine the guilt or innocence of Lee Harvey Oswald, but here there is a different fini. He advised that his association with Oswald was terminated when he, Thornley, was transferred overseas. Here also Thornley said that Oswald studied Russian in Japan, and it was his opinion that Oswald was not a communist while he was assigned to the El Toro Marine Base. He gave the news media as his source of the information that Oswald had returned to the United States disillusioned about communism. Thornley read papers I have never seen or heard quoted. Although he says he was in New Orleans beginning August 1st, 1963, no. No. February 1st, 1962. That's when Thornley gets to New Orleans. Oswald got to New Orleans the first week of June of 1962. But then he bounced back and forth. He thus claims to have known nothing about Oswald's 8/9/63 arrest. Quite naturally, he's talking about the arrest in front of the Trade Mart with Carlos Bernier. Quite naturally, the agents reflect no questioning along this line. After all, aside from having known him, Thornley had only written a novel about him. Strangely, this sentence, quote, he stated that he had made no secret that he was not particularly disturbed over the death of President Kennedy, although he does not approve of assassination, nor does he approve of the subsequent murder of Oswald. Rather, an understatement designed to raise the question before it sounds like the language used to cover for Ferry, who might be raised for him. Let me reread this. Question before it might be raised for him sounds like the language used to cover for Ferry, who also was known to have hated and threatened the president, whose murder the FBI was investigating allegedly. Okay, whatever. In this spirit, Thornley volunteered that while in California, he, quote, adopted an extremely liberal point of view, went with a girl named Sylvia Barton, now married, name unknown, who is now resident and studying in Havana, Cuba. Then Thornley volunteered that she adopted the communist philosophy. Thornley then placed his present political position, quote, somewhere between the communist left and the John Birch right. Jesus Christ, this guy's such an asshole. In a sense, Thornley didn't intend. Anthony Shembrowski did, quote, finger him in reporting his December 1st, 1963 conversation with Jeannie Hack, the, quote, wife of Kerry Thornley. She told him that Oswald and Thornley were very good friends and that Thornley had stated to her if Oswald hadn't killed President Kennedy, he would have done it himself. She stated that Thornley had a shotgun at home and that she did not think he would hesitate to use it. What better reason can there be for the absence of any FBI interview? With FBI interview with Jeannie Hack, of the many others than possible from this concluding sentence alone. Quote, Shembrowski stated Thornley sometimes caused trouble at the Bourbon House, a place Thornley frequented quite a lot. As Wesley Liebler put it, Albert Jenner was too busy running for the presidency of the American Bar Association to do much work. It is he who deposed Thornley, a very polite affair in which none of this came up except Oswald's politics, which suddenly became communist. The testimony is well known to you. Perhaps the exhibits are not. There are three, two of which are not printed. The first is a States Item story of November 27, 63, 218-669, to which I shall return. The second is The Idle Warriors, all 250 pages of it, and there has been no response to my inquiry about its availability. And the third is the 37 pages of the novella. Although staff memorandum are, I can't read that, it looks like source, and Jenner was so busy campaigning, he nonetheless thought it necessary to write two different memos to Melvin Eisenberg 10 days later, differently captioned but on those exhibits. In one, Oswald was, quote, inspiration for the central character, Johnny Shelburne. In the other, it was, quote, depicted Oswald. The news story is interesting, probably important, and I believe the picture with it is significant. That picture shows Thornley with his hair parted on the left. As I show it in the pictures, I had Clancy print backward. I would hope this picture is still available to States Item, for it proves that at the time of the assassination, Thornley's hairline was like Oswald's. I love this. With the other evidence he could have played the role of Oswald, I draw particular attention to it, and to Phil Boatwright's statement to me that if everything else about Thornley was untidy, his hair was something to which he devoted special attention. This is fantastic. This story is also the beginning of the falsehood about Oswald having lost his security clearance and the garbage about him being, quote, the outfit janitor. Hardly a description of one of the few members of the unusually high security clearance, as Thornley's testimony reveals he knew. Here, too, is the beginning of the characterization of Oswald as a loser again, something not supported by his Marine record. Perhaps also we can lay to rest the story about the fantastic sum Thornley is said to have refused for the last chapter of his book. In the light of recent events, an agent is now seeking to sell the last few chapters as the basis for a television script. Clint Bolton, a guy who's definitely on our fucking agenda, isn't he? Clint Bolton told me he could do nothing with the book, and that he tried. Nothing is less likely than either Thornley or Bolton would have rejected any offer, leave alone a very generous one. According to Jenner's 2-page memo, the manuscript was then almost 2 years old. Sure, sign its prospects were not bright. The shorter memo contains this assurance by Jenner. In his deposition, Thornley certified to the accuracy of the article and particularly the quotations. Returning to the story, the very next quotation reads, I think Oswald became a communist before he became a Marine, but I believe the Marines only made things worse for him. Soon this, quote, he said through communism was his best religion, or was the best religion. This coming from the Thornley who just a few days earlier had been telling federal investigators the exact opposite. I can only wonder why Jenner wrote 2 memos, whom usually there were none, when usually there were none. Therefore, I quote language about, quote, the idle warriors from the longer one, not in the shorter one. Thornley testified that the evidence given by him on his deposition covered fully adequately and factually Thornley's contacts with and views concerning Oswald, and that therefore it appeared to him that there was nothing in the book that had not already been placed in the record in the course of his deposition insofar as concerned any issue involving Oswald being investigated by the commission. Jesus. If nothing else, flagged interest in the garbling, which is more than even Jenner usually came up with, the qualification being investigated by the commission, should for us, as we know, that when what it should have investigated, it didn't. If I may conjecture, is it possible that your spurse on the unlikely story that he turned down a very good NBC offer made up this story to direct you to the manuscript without being in the position of having deliberately told you what it might contain? Strangely, for anybody but this one, the manuscript did not come into our possession until the day that Mr. Thornley's deposition was taken, only because they didn't want it. The federal investigators knew about it, therefore the commission did. As late as May 15th, when Rankin wrote Thornley, it could still have been requested in advance of the deposition. Thornley was in the same town virtually, and the FBI and the commission had messengers. Instead of asking for the manuscript in advance so the lawyer could read it prior to taking the deposition, Rankin asked him to bring it with him. Jesus fucking Christ. Oh my God. I believe it is one of the transcripts of his radio TV appearances in the Tampa area that Thornley, knowing it to be entirely false, said federal attention was directed to him by Shimbrowski, FBI spelling. With the Secret Service lead coming from Dallas, do you suppose it is possible the source was Oswald during his interrogation? Note that although Thornley had been at 1824 Dauphine, the Dallas Secret Service had his correct address. Whatever the source, it would seem to have been one keeping tabs on Thornley. We know that the federal reporting is notoriously inaccurate, yet these would have to be errors against interest for the reports quoting Thornley as saying Oswald was not a communist to be errors. What the federal investigators very much wanted is just this statement. Odd that as soon as he was away from them or their report, Thornley said exactly what they wanted. Possibly Shimbrowski, I got to zoom in a bit. Possibly Shimbrowski had interviewed to learn whether the FBI quoted him accurately. After first seeing this attribution by Thornley, I planned to look him up. I've not had time on my 2 most recent trips to New Orleans. If one of your people cannot do it, if his address can be checked for me, when next I'm there, I can do it when I have a few free moments. If he has left the New Orleans area, he might be somewhere I may someday go. If Jeannie Hack is still in San Francisco, I'd like the last address you have. If I do not get out there in the near future, I have friends who can interview her for me. If she is elsewhere, I'd like to know in case I go near. It is always possible the FBI or Shimbrowski misrepresented what she said, yet it also was consistent with what we know. Of all the people I have spoken to about Thornley, only one ever said he did not hate Kennedy. That is Barbara Reed. And even when she heard Clint Bolton answer my question, did Thornley hate Kennedy? In the affirmative, she persisted in signs behind Bolton's back that it wasn't so. She could have faulty recollection, or she could have been protecting a friend, but it is also not possible that Thornley believed any search would reach her, and he deliberately told her the opposite of what he felt so that she would repeat it. Aside from friendship, he knew that any investigation would reach her because it is with her that he left his files when he went to Washington. Your files have a letter from him on this that I got from her long ago. Come on, there we go. All right, we have another letter now. Confidential. Oh, no, this just seems to be more of the same. Why the fuck they do this? It drives me up a goddamn wall. That's a duplication. Duplication. All right, most of this seems to be duplication. We'll move on to the next one. So this isn't a letter. This is a memorandum, but I wanted to include it because it was relevant. It had some additional names also. And so let me see what we have here. All right. So it's a memorandum dated May 27th, 1968. To Jim Garrison from Assistant DA Andrew J. Scambra. Interview with David Graydon, May 27th, 1968. David Graydon relayed the following information to us. He was a very intimate friend of William C. Brady, and for a time lived with him. He said he would regard Brady as a definite right-winger who was connected with Cuban organizations in the New Orleans area. He was a friend of Ernesto Rodriguez, and for a while taught at the Berlitz Language School around 1962 and 1963. He said that Brady also knew Ross Buckley and was very close to Helen Gladstone. Gladstone supposedly has some of Brady's written materials and could be very helpful to us concerning Brady. However, Gladstone is a personal friend and was very sympathetic toward Shaw. Graydon said that Brady speaks Spanish and French fluently and is a graduate of Harvard University. Brady used to attend Cuban meetings at the International House with Ernesto Rodriguez and Marcel Gomez. Graydon said that he doesn't know Kerry Thornley and he does not know if Brady knew Thornley. Graydon lived with Brady from July of 1962 till August of 1962, and then from June of 1963 till August of 1963 at 414 Burgundy Street. Brady gave several parties at his apartment in 1963, and they were usually held on Saturday nights. Graydon said that he was told, possibly by Lee Sens, that Oswald attended 2 of these parties in Brady's apartment. He also said Brady knows Shaw, but that he doesn't know Shaw and cannot say if Shaw has ever been to Brady's parties. He said Eddie Porter may be very helpful to us concerning Lee Oswald. However, Porter is in Sydney, Australia at the present time. He said that Kenneth Owen may be able to give us some information about Eddie Porter. He said he knows that FBI has recently tried to contact Porter. He said that Brady has never mentioned Bringier's name to his knowledge. He said that he can remember Brady pushing a very hard for a politician in Texas in either 60 or 61 election. This politician had gray hair. He said that Seth Hawley, who is Eddie Porter's half-sister, is in town living here. He said that he would try to get Eddie Porter's address from her. He said that we should contact Jim Soar, who is currently a prisoner at Angola. Soar ran an apartment house for over 2J's Bar on Decatur Street and catered to the kooky set. Bruce Owens lived there. Remember, Bruce Owens was connected to that Washington coffee house. Bruce Owens lived there along with other people who frequented the Bourbon House scene. Soar gave parties quite regularly on the top of the roof, and it's quite possible that Oswald may have attended these parties. Graydon said that Soar is the type of person who would definitely have been interested in Oswald and vice versa. Shaw is represented by Tommy Baumler and is considered quite dangerous. He has also spent a bit of time around the Bourbon House. Graydon said we should also talk to Gene Trahan, who at the present time is in Baton Rouge Parish Prison. Trahan was a frequent visitor to the Ryder Club, the Ryder Coffee House. Marty Flederman worked at Castillo's restaurant and had a girlfriend named Morge, Morge. They were part of the Thornley crowd, and they are in California now. Graydon said Brady's closest friends in town were Helen Gladstone, Lekla Freya, and Vernon Kellogg. These are all personal friends of Clay Shaw. Note, Jim Soar, number 195-443, Section E, was charged with sale of marijuana on February 5th, 1966, at his residence at 506 Governor Nichols Street. He was extradited from San Francisco, California in the summer of 67. Records indicate another address for Jim Soar of 732 Burgundy Street. All right, moving on. We have another letter from Harold Weisberg. Dear Lou. He's probably writing to Lou Ivan, investigator for Garrison. Here are the Thornley letters. This is dated 6/8/68, so we're moving on chronologically. Here are the Thornley letters with envelopes and the Boatwright employment records, especially because of the loss of the first set I sent you. I again remind you of the agreement under which I got this material and Boatwright's cooperation, that no one on the paid staff would see it and no public use would be made unless necessary in court. I again remind you that, can't read that, M something something was supposed to go over the copies of his personal phone book. Eliminate what is not germane on all 3 sets and send me mine. This has not happened. It just isn't right for all those names having no connection with anything to be kicking around loosely. I suggest that this, aside from establishing when Boatwright was in New Orleans and his connection with Courtney, etc., his personal records need interest no one. My copier is not working well, and I'm almost out of paper. It cost me $75 to get a new supply. That's like $750 in today's fucking money. Jesus. So again, I have made but a single set. Can you please Xerox what you need for yourself and return these to me so I'll have a set to work with? I have several people to see in this area as soon as I get time, including the person who made Boatwright possible. If there is any new material of which I should know before I see these people, I'd like to know about it. One name on a card is Kerry Sutton. I think Crest mentioned this name as associated with Kerry, but I am not certain. Of the last name, I am. Again, this is not too uncommon a name, but we can follow back with, looks like FB on him. Because after a week, you did not have any negatives on the other way. I'm waiting for prints for other work with them one way or another. I'll send this to the office registered. I'll be leaving for New York early in the morning, so with the local PO already closed for the weekend, that'll take some doing. I forgot the New York Times story in the previous mailing mentioned in a letter to Jim. And that's it for that one. And we got one more. Dear Jim, the enclosed, this is dated 6/19/68. The enclosed is for your Thornley file. I obtained it from Hal Verb. Hal was with me that early morning when Oswald's former Marine Corps mate phoned me to tell me Oswald had a crypto clearance. I had Hal on the phone extension and he heard the entire conversation. We were immediately anxious to find this guy and continued our efforts until September of 1967, when we knew he'd be in Washington attending a business convention of an unspecified kind. That helped us limit it, but there was no time for the careful check of the conventions there that month. Hal asked Welch to look Thornley up in L.A. to see what he might know about this. The idea was to get the names of all the former Marine associates and one by one contact them until we found the one who had phoned me. The annotations of the copy of this letter are Hal's. What the first words of Thornley's response indicate is that he, without knowledge of what I had then not published, also was aware of the fact that Oswald may have been other than he represented. Sincerely, Harold Weisberg. So, all right, that puts us about 42 in the list of files. Okay, so we're about halfway done with Weisberg's Kerry Thornley archive. Something tells me this is grossly incomplete too, because when you read through Weisberg's shit, this motherfucker, he kept every single scrap of paper he ever had. He kept every fucking letter he ever wrote. Half of his letters, he just goes off on these endless diatribes, and you gotta fucking read 15 pages of bullshit to pick out one little fucking nugget of possibly relevant information. I mean, the guy was obsessed, to say the least, so... But we're about halfway through these. It's going to take another week or two to get through the rest of them. And but everybody was really interested in Kerry Thornley after they read the book. So they read the book and they're like, holy fuck, this Kerry Thornley guy is like spilling the beans. Like, yeah, he spilled the fucking beans and everybody knew it. Everybody fucking knew it. So we're going to pick this back up tomorrow. What day is fucking tomorrow? 13th. I keep saying tomorrow, but it ends up being 2 days. But I'm really trying to get this to be a daily. Really badly. So yeah, we'll be back here tomorrow. We'll be on part 6 of this stuff, and I keep harping on everybody. Like, I don't shill you with fucking, any host read ads or any sponsorships or any bullshit, because I got a book to sell. So please go buy the book, and also it would really support my work if you were to go to buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook. Pick up one of my limited edition posters. I've only got 90 left or 91 left, something like that, Come on, it's going to be worth $1 million one day. It's better than a fucking NFT, all right? You can actually put your hands on it. And what else is there? Autographed books I'm going to have coming. I'm going to have about 10 hardcovers coming in the next couple weeks. A couple of them are spoken for, but I'll have at least 7 or 8 of them available. They'll be $75 signed, shipped. And I'll have some soft covers. Those are $50 shipped and signed. And so yeah, please hit me up if you want one of those, or just go to buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook and put it in order there. Otherwise, please go to Amazon.com and buy my book. If you want to understand the Kennedy assassination, you're going to go buy my book, right? That's all there is to it. If you really want to understand this stuff, quit fucking listening to me and go get the goddamn book, right? So that's going to do it for today, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you.